Hey everyone! This morning I am making cinnamon rolls. I'm making them because my dad requested them to bring into work. This recipe makes a dozen cinnamon rolls. I will go over some of the options that you could do to freeze them if you don't want to eat all 12 or have all 12 on hand. And this is a yeasted dough, so it is going to require some time, but there are ways to cut down on that time. Say you want cinnamon rolls in the morning, you probably don't want to get up really early to make these, so you just have to do some prep work the night before, and then you'll be able to make them in the morning really quick. So I'll explain that as I go, but first, to start off, you need a packet of active dry yeast. I know it's hard to find right now, but if you have it, you can make these. So we just heated up the milk and butter that are required for this recipe. It's a cup of milk. I used almond milk this time. Sometimes I use coconut milk. You can use regular milk. And 6 tablespoons of butter. I heated it up in the microwave for about 45 seconds, and it was the perfect temperature for the yeast. If you don't have a thermometer, you don't have to worry about it. The 45 seconds will heat it up to the right temperature. It should be, if you do have a thermometer, if you want to check, it should be around 100 to 110 degrees. 105 is ideal, but like in between there is good. If you make it too hot, it will kill the yeast. If you make it too cold, if you keep it too cold, then the yeast won't activate. And I also so we have the milk, the butter, the yeast, and I mixed in a 1/4 cup of sugar. And I let this sit for about 5 minutes now, and it's gotten nice and foamy on top. So I'm gonna put it into my stand mixer. Right now in the stand mixer I have the other 1/4 cup of sugar that this recipe requires, 2 eggs, and a teaspoon of vanilla. So I'm gonna pour in my milk mixture. And I'm just gonna beat this together a little bit so the eggs and everything combines. Okay, so now all I have to add to the dough is flour and a little bit of salt. So I'm gonna start putting in my flour slowly as the mixture is mixing. I'm using a dough hook on my stand mixer. And you can use a regular beater if you need to, like a hand beater. If you don't have a stand mixer, that's completely fine too. Okay, so I added a little over 4 cups of flour to this dough. If you add the 4 cups that it requires and then it still looks like pretty sticky, you can add just like a couple tablespoons more, just so it's not so sticky. I added a couple tablespoons, but mine is still a little sticky, so you can be kind of liberal with the flour, but don't go crazy because you don't want the dough to get too dry. Okay, so definitely flour your surface, flour your hands, put some flour on top of the dough. And we're just gonna knead it on the counter for about 5 minutes. So I've been kneading the dough for about 5 minutes now. It's still definitely a little on the sticky side, but it's nice and smooth. And now I'm just going to put it in a large bowl that I already greased with some oil. and we have to let it rise for about an hour. I'm gonna cover it. Now I'm gonna, if you've watched previous videos, I think I've said already that when I let dough rise, I usually put it in my oven because it can be cooler down here in the basement apartment that I live in. So you can use the oven if you need to help the dough rise. Or if it's warm enough, because it only has to be like 70, 72 degrees for the dough to rise, then just leave it out on your countertop, that's fine. Just cover it. So I'm gonna let this rise. And now while it's rising, I'm gonna make the brown sugar cinnamon filling. So I'm just gonna clean up my work surface a little bit. Okay, so I have a little bowl. Butter, I need another 6 tablespoons of butter for the brown sugar filling. I've got my cinnamon and brown sugar. Okay, so we're gonna need a cup of brown sugar. And with measuring brown sugar, you don't just kind of scoop it into and pour it into your bowl like you do with flour or sugar. You have to pack the sugar down in the measuring cup for it to be measured properly. I have no idea why, but that's what you're supposed to do. So I have my cup of brown sugar. And now I need about 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. Ooey. And I need 6 tablespoons of butter. And you want your butter to be a little bit softened. It'll be easier to mix in with the cinnamon and the brown sugar. You don't want to melt it. I guess you could, but I like it softer. It's almost easier to spread. It's not like super liquidy. I don't think that would work if you put a liquid filling on top of the dough. And it's easier if you cut the butter up into like cubes or pieces instead of just putting the whole stick or big piece right into the bowl. It's easier if it's already cut up. So I'm just mixing with a spoon. I'm kind of like cutting it in when you cut in butter into if you're making like a pie crust or something. And then the butter will start melding in, I guess you could say, with the brown sugar and the cinnamon. Okay, so my butter and sugar and cinnamon are fully combined. Right now it's more of a thicker paste, but I'm gonna leave it out on the counter while my dough is rising, so it's gonna get a little bit softer and easier to spread once the dough is ready to roll out. Okay, so the dough has risen for an hour. It's puffed up, it's pretty much doubled up in size, and now I'm going to put it back onto my counter, floured. Okay, So I want to try and get it kind of in like a semi-square shape. The dough's still going to be a little tacky, but it's not super sticky like it was before. So I floured the bottom, I'm going to flour the top. I'm going to flour my rolling pin. And now, now I'm going to roll it out to a 12 by 24 inch square. Okay, it should be good now. Yep, it's a 25, so I have an inch that I could cut off, and it's actually 14 wide, but that's okay. If it's a little bit higher, that's fine. I'd rather it be bigger than smaller. So, the cinnamon filling is pretty pasty. And now I'm just gonna drop it in like blobs onto the I'm gonna drop it into blobs onto the pastry and then kind of spread it out with the spoon and with my fingers. Okay, so I smushed all the cinnamon onto it. Notice I left like a bit of a border so the cinnamon, once we roll it up, won't like eke out the edge. But so we're gonna roll it up now pretty slowly. Just start like getting those edges, and we're gonna roll it long ways. That's important. Oh, and if you have a brush, you know, like if you use a brush for egg wash or something, just use it to brush the excess flour off the dough, because then the dough won't get, it'll help the dough to not get dry. If you leave that flour on, it might get a little dry. A trick to avoid the cinnamon rolls sticking on the countertop like this as you roll it is to not like drown it in flour, but to, once you roll it, if you roll it a couple times, just move it and then roll it and then move it, and then it won't stick to the countertop. I should have done that. I'm just moving some of the flour out of the way so it doesn't get on the rolls. Okay, so let me move it back so you can see. Okay, so I have my big long roll. You could just flour the edge because the edge is probably going to have, brush the edge because the edge is probably going to have more flour. Okay. So now, since it's about 24 inches long, we're going to, first we'll take our measuring tape. And if you don't have a measuring tape or a ruler or something, you don't have to. You can eyeball it, but if you want your cinnamon rolls to cook evenly and kind of be the same size, it's best to use some sort of measuring tape or ruler. Okay, mine's stretched out to actually 30 inches now, so I'm just gonna chop off a couple inches from each side. I usually save the ends. Don't throw these out. You could save them and put them in like a little glass Pyrex dish, and I just bake them on the side with the rest of my rolls in the oven, and then it's just like these little ends that you could put some icing on and eat. You don't have to like serve them to people or anything. It could just be like scraps to eat at home. Okay, so now mine's about 25 inches, so I'm gonna make it just a little bit larger than 2 inches, and I'll get 12 rolls out of this. Okay, so I have a little chunk of extra, so that one's gonna go in here too. And now I have two 9x13 pans. You can just use like a baking pan if you want, if you don't have like a square tin like this. But I am going to, actually I'm gonna grease these first. They're non-stick, but I always grease them anyway. You don't need to put flour or anything, but I just do a little bit of butter just to help with like it not sticking. And I'm going to do 6 rolls in each pan, kind of evenly spaced out, so they all cook properly at the same time, so some aren't undercooked, because I've tried to cook them all 12 in this one pan and it never seemed to work. When I cooked it, the middle is never cooked as fast as the outside, so the middle would be raw, and then I'd be like adding more time, and it just was frustrating. So I do it this way instead, and this way they're not so jam-packed together. They kind of have a little bit of room to spread out, so it looks like a nice swirl. So I'm just placing them in here, and then they do need to rise again for another half an hour before they go into the oven. Now, at this point, this is where you have options. So if you don't want to cook all of them, you could put them in however many you want, like one pan, and just cook one pan. You could put one pan like this in the freezer. You're gonna flash freeze the cinnamon rolls, and then you'll take them out and wrap them airtight in saran wrap, or put them in an airtight container, and then you'll have them frozen, uncooked, and you could take them out when you want to and defrost them and let them rise for that last half hour and then cook them. So that's an option. The other option is to cook them, and then you could freeze them cooked already. So cook them, let them cool off, and then you could freeze them that way without icing on them. And then all you have to do is pop it out of the freezer, and I think you can microwave it. No, I would let it defrost first and then microwave it to heat it up a little bit. Or put it in the microwave on the defrost setting and then heat it up. And then there's one more thing. If you want to cook these in the morning and you don't want to do all this work in the morning, you could do what we just did at night beforehand, you know, like in the evening or before bed, whatever. And then once you get up to this point where they have to rest for the half hour and they're already rolls, then you could put them covered in saran wrap in the fridge and let them stay there overnight. It slows down the rise, so they're essentially rising the amount that they need to overnight, and then when you wake up in the morning, just take them out of the fridge, turn on your oven to preheat it, let them get to room temp as the oven's preheating, and then pop them in and cook them. You don't have to do any work in the morning. So I do that quite a lot. I make it at night, and then we have them in the morning. And you can make the icing either in the morning while they're cooking, or you can make the icing at night, whatever you want. So there's some options. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let these rest for half an hour, and then I'm gonna cook them and you'll see them all done, and we're gonna make the icing. So I'm gonna start working on the icing. I already put a stick of butter in my bowl and I beat it. It was softened so it's easier to beat with the hand mixer. The icing that I use is just butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla. You could look up a cream cheese icing recipe if you want to. It's a little bit more decadent. It's closer to Cinnabon if you really wanted to taste like a Cinnabon, but this is also really good. I mean, I haven't had cream cheese frosting in a while because I can't really have dairy, but this tastes pretty close to it, I think. So I beat my stick of butter. Now I'm going to add the vanilla, and then I'm going to add the powdered sugar in a half a cup at a time, just so I don't have a big poof of powdered sugar in my kitchen. And I'll be putting 2 cups of powdered sugar in. Okay, so I finished my icing. It's good. I mean, this is pretty thick. I usually put it on thick like this. If you want it thinner, you can put like a tablespoon at a time of a milk of your choice into it to get the consistency that you want. I think I might put a tablespoon of milk into this just to make it slightly thinner, but when it's thick like this, I just kind of like slather it on with a rubber spatula and then it melts because you're gonna put the icing on once it comes out of the oven anyway. Yeah, and it's super yummy. But so we're finished with the icing, and then we're gonna put some icing on those cinnamon buns once they come out. The cinnamon rolls cooked in the oven for a little over 20 minutes. It was more like 22-ish, and then halfway through I had them on 2 different racks, so I switched them. But then I actually realized that I could put the 2 racks on the 2 tins on the same rack. It actually fits, so I did that at the end just to get them golden brown. Just make sure you're watching them in the oven. Once they get golden brown like this, then you know they're finished. So these are my dozen rolls. I'm not actually going to put icing on them right now because my dad's going to bring them into work. So these are what they look like finished, and I put icing on my little extra bowl, so I'm gonna eat this. And I was just saying to my husband, I'm actually really happy that I have the little extra that I cut off at the ends, because I don't think I could not eat a cinnamon roll if I'm making them, and I wanted my dad to have all dozen. But so this is what I'm gonna eat, and I'm gonna take a bite. It is perfect. It's nice and crispy on the outside, nice and gooey on the inside, and the icing is perfect. I love cinnamon rolls. I hope you make them. Everybody have a great day.